The rain had been falling since morning, turning the streets outside my small rented house into muddy rivers. I stood by the window, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold, watching the drops race each other down the glass. Somewhere in that grey sky, I tried to find a reason to keep going, a reason to believe that life hadn't given up on me yet. I wasn't born into pain. My life used to be warm, simple, filled with laughter that echoed through the walls of my parents' home. I married young, perhaps too young. Everyone told me he was a good man. Daniel, my husband, was kind at first. He had the smile that could melt away a day's worries, and the patience that made me believe in forever. We built a life together in the city, not big, not rich, but peaceful. I thought love would be enough to face whatever storms might come. But storms don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through people you trust. It began with his mother, my mother-in-law. She was the kind of woman who never smiled, unless it was at someone's downfall. From the day I entered her house, she looked at me as if I'd stolen something precious from her. Every morning her words sliced through the walls like knives. You don't know how to cook properly. You waste my son's money. You're useless. Women from your family are weak. At first, I tried to win her heart. I cooked her favorite meals, cleaned every corner of the house, even avoided meeting my friends because she didn't like guests. I believed patience would turn her heart softer. But patience, I learned, sometimes feeds cruelty. Instead of ending it, then, little by little, her whispers began to poison Daniel's mind. He came home late, quieter than usual. When I asked what was wrong, he would sigh, say nothing, and drift away into silence. A distance grew between us, invisible but thick, like fog. He started questioning my every move. Why I went to the market alone. Why I talked too long on the phone with my mother. Why I didn't wear what his mother liked. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Daniel came home angry. His mother had told him that I disrespected her. A lie, of course. I tried to explain, but before I could finish, he shouted. That was the first night he raised his voice at me. The walls trembled. My heart broke a little. It didn't stop there. Arguments became daily routine. My tears became my pillow. My smile vanished. Then came the day everything shattered. I still remember the smell of wet earth that morning. I was 3 months pregnant, nervous but happy. I thought maybe the child would bring Daniel closer to me again. But when I told him, his reaction wasn't joy. It was silence. He looked away, then muttered, "I don't know if this is mine." His mother's eyes glowed with satisfaction. She had won. That night I packed my few clothes and tried to leave, but Daniel stopped me. Not with love, but with anger. He said I wouldn't go anywhere without his permission. I stayed, not out of choice, but because I had nowhere to go. My parents were gone. My siblings lived far away, and I had no savings of my own. For the next few months, life became unbearable. I wasn't treated like a wife anymore. I was treated like a burden. My pregnancy was ignored, my health forgotten. There were days I didn't eat until night, and days when tears were the only thing I consumed. When my son was born, a tiny, beautiful boy with soft brown eyes, I felt alive again. I named him Noah, after the prophet who survived the flood. He was my flood and my salvation. For a while, I believed Daniel might change after seeing his son. He didn't. 2 years later, he left. He said he needed space, that he was tired of our constant arguments. But I knew the truth. His mother had found him another woman, someone better, someone who didn't question him, someone who didn't have a crying child to care for. He left me and Noah with nothing but a few clothes and unpaid rent. His mother made sure we were out of her house within days. I begged her, not for money but for mercy. She looked at me with those cold eyes and said, "You should have listened to me. Maybe then my son would still respect you." That was the last thing she said before shutting the door on me forever. I found a small room in a broken part of the city. Walls cracked, ceiling leaking, but it was home because it was ours. I started working at a nearby bakery, cleaning tables and washing dishes. My hands cracked from soap and cold water, but every time Noah smiled, the pain faded. At night, after putting him to sleep, I'd sew clothes for neighbors to earn extra coins. Sleep became a luxury. Hunger became a habit. People often looked at me with pity, whispering, "Poor woman, abandoned by her husband." But I didn't want pity. I wanted justice. Not through law, but through life itself. I promised myself one thing. One day I'll rise so high that they will bow their heads in regret. Years passed, and Noah grew stronger, wiser. Every time I saw his eyes, I remembered why I had to keep fighting. I saved every penny, every tip, every coin that came my way. When I had enough, I started my own small home kitchen, making and selling meals to office workers. I woke before dawn, cooked till noon, and delivered on my bicycle, even when the rain soaked my clothes or the wind burned my skin. People loved my food. They said it reminded them of home. Within 2 years, my kitchen turned into a small business, Laze's Table. Soon, I hired 2 helpers, then 4. The smell of fresh bread and soup filled my home once again. I finally smiled without forcing it, but fate wasn't done with me yet. One day, as I was delivering an order to a nearby street, I saw a familiar figure sitting outside a pharmacy. Old, weak, holding out his hand for money. My heart stopped. It was Daniel. His once proud posture was gone, replaced by wrinkles and shame. His clothes were torn, his shoes broken. I learned from neighbors that his mother had passed away, leaving him with debts and nothing else. The woman he left me for had also abandoned him. He didn't recognize me at first. Maybe because I looked different now, stronger, calmer, dressed like someone who had built her own world. I stood there for a while, watching him beg for coins, remembering every night I had begged him for love, for compassion, for a chance to live. I wanted to walk away, but something in me, maybe the mother in me, maybe the woman I had become, made me walk toward him. I handed him some food from my bag and said softly, "Do you remember how it feels to be hungry?" He looked up, and his eyes widened as he recognized me. His lips trembled. "Laze," he whispered. I didn't reply. I just smiled, placed the food beside him, and walked away into the rain. That night, as I tucked Noah into bed, I realized my revenge wasn't about hurting him. It was about showing him that I could survive without him, that I could turn pain into power, loss into life. I looked around at my small but warm house, ours, truly ours, and whispered to myself, I did it, not for revenge, but for peace. And outside, the rain kept falling. But this time, it felt like cleansing, not destruction. After that rainy day, something inside me shifted forever. Seeing Daniel on the street had unlocked an ache I thought I'd buried. For years, I had worked every hour of the day, driven by the idea of proving him wrong, of showing the world that I could rise. But when I actually saw him, fragile, defeated, empty, my anger didn't roar. It quieted. Revenge, I realized, doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like peace. Still, life didn't slow down. I couldn't afford to pause. My little business, Laze's Table, was growing faster than I'd ever dreamed. My kitchen that once smelled of struggle now smelled of success. My customers called my food comfort on a plate. I expanded the menu, bought a used van, and began taking larger orders from offices and schools. The sound of sizzling pans and chopping knives became my morning song. The laughter of my team, 2 young girls who reminded me of my younger self, filled the air. I was no longer the woman who cried in the corner. I was a businesswoman, a mother, a survivor. Sometimes, though, when the night grew quiet, I'd find myself standing by the window, staring into the darkness, remembering the years I lost. I wondered if revenge really healed the wounds of betrayal, or if it simply hid them under new scars. Noah, now a tall, confident teenager, had started helping me with deliveries. He was the reason behind every step I took. Watching him grow, seeing him smile after years of silence, that was my victory. He didn't remember much about his father, and I never spoke ill of Daniel. I didn't want my son's heart to carry my pain. But deep down, I could feel the curiosity building inside him. The world was beginning to whisper to him about who his father was. One night, after a long day at work, Noah came to me. His eyes were serious, older than his years. "Mom," he said softly, "people in the neighborhood, they say Dad is alive, that he's not well. Is it true?" I froze for a moment, the spoon in my hand trembling slightly. "Yes," I whispered. "It's true." He looked down at the floor, silent for a long moment, then asked, "Do you hate him?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say I hated him for every sleepless night, for every tear I shed while holding Noah, for every humiliation. But instead, I said, "No, Noah, I don't hate him. Hate is heavy. It keeps you from moving forward. I've already walked too far to carry it." He nodded, though I could see confusion in his eyes. To him, forgiveness didn't make sense. He hadn't seen what I'd seen. But one day I knew he would understand. Months passed, and my business grew, beyond what I could handle alone. One of my customers, a restaurant owner named Mr. Carter, offered to partner with me. "Your food has soul," he said. "Let's open a proper restaurant, a place that tells your story." At first I was scared. I had built everything with my own hands. What if it failed? But Noah encouraged me. "You've come this far, Mom," he said, smiling. "It's time people know your name." And so, Laze's table became a real restaurant, a warm, rustic place with wooden tables, candles on every corner, and photographs on the wall that told stories of mothers, sons, and strength. The first night it opened, I stood at the entrance in disbelief, watching people fill the seats, laughing, enjoying the food I'd once cooked in a tiny leaking kitchen. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone at a table and whispered, "I did it, Mom. You'd be proud." But fate, as always, has a way of testing peace. A week later, a young man came into the restaurant. He looked nervous, holding a crumpled letter in his hand. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Laze?" "Yes," I replied, smiling politely. "How can I help you?" I work at a community shelter. There's an older man there. He says he knows you. His name is Daniel." My heart sank. It felt like someone had opened an old wound that had barely healed. "He said he doesn't want anything," the man continued. "But he wanted me to tell you, he's sorry." Those words echoed in my head long after the man left. He's sorry. For years I had dreamed of hearing those two words. Now that they were finally here, they didn't bring satisfaction. They brought silence. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over the memories, like pages of a book I thought I'd finished. The shouting, the betrayal, the hunger. All of it came back in flashes. But there was also that day in the rain when I gave him food instead of anger. Maybe that was the beginning of my healing, not the end. The next morning, I told Noah I had an errand and drove to the address the young man had given me. It was a small shelter on the edge of the city. Cracked walls, an old sign that read, "Hope Home." Inside, I saw men and women sitting quietly, each carrying their own story of loss. And then I saw him. Daniel was sitting near the window, looking out at the same kind of rain that had followed our story all these years. His hair was white, his face thinner than I remembered, but his eyes, those eyes were the same. He saw me, and I could see a flicker of disbelief, then shame. "Laze," he whispered, "you came." I didn't know what to say. Words felt too small for what stood between us. Finally, I spoke. I didn't come to argue, Daniel. I just came to see if you were alive. He laughed weakly. Alive? Barely. I've been dying for years, Laze. Not just in body, but in soul. Every night I see your face. Every morning I regret everything I did. I stayed silent. He went on, his voice trembling. My mother, she poisoned everything. My mind, my heart. I thought I was saving myself by obeying her, but I destroyed everything instead. The woman I left you for, she left me too. Took everything. I deserve what happened. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You do, I said quietly, but not because I want revenge, because that's how life works, Daniel. It gives back what you give to others. He nodded slowly. I know, and yet seeing you here, I feel peace. You look happy, strong. I am, I said, because I stopped waiting for anyone else to make me happy. There was a long silence. The rain outside began to fade into a soft drizzle. He reached into his pocket and took out a small torn photograph of me and Noah from years ago. I kept it, he said. It was all I had. Something in me softened then, maybe because I realized that pain too can get tired. I stood up and said quietly, "Take care of yourself, Daniel. Goodbye." As I turned to leave, he called out, "Laze!" Thank you. That word, thank you, followed me all the way home. When I returned, Noah was waiting at the door. "Where were you, Mom?" he asked. "You look different." "I went to see your father," I said. "He's not well." His eyes widened. "Why would you do that after everything he did?" I smiled gently. "Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting Noah. It means freeing yourself." He didn't say anything for a while, then finally nodded. "You're stronger than anyone I know, Mom." That night, I sat by Noah's bedside as he slept, watching his peaceful face. And I realized this was my revenge, not through anger, not through pain, but through survival, dignity, and success. Because nothing hurts those who wronged you more than seeing you rise without them. End of part 2, 2,500 words. Would you like me to continue with part 3, where Laze faces a moral dilemma? Daniel passes away, leaving something unexpected behind, and she must decide whether to accept it or walk away. You said, part 3 ChatGPT said, here's part 3 of Laze's story, written in a cinematic, emotional tone with deep narration by Laze. 2,500 words. Part 3. The Weight of Forgiveness. The morning after I saw Daniel at the shelter, I woke up before dawn. For the first time in years, my chest felt heavy, not with anger, but with something harder to name: emptiness. I stood by the kitchen window, staring at the horizon as the city began to wake. The sky was painted in grey and gold, and the smell of rain still lingered in the air. The world felt quiet, almost too quiet. I made tea, sat down at the table, and stared at my reflection in the cup. My face had changed over the years. Lines that told stories of sleepless nights, small scars that whispered of struggles I'd survived. But in my eyes, there was still that flicker of the woman who once cried for love, for peace, for a home. It was strange how even after all this time, Daniel could still stir something inside me. Not love, not even hate, just a reminder of who I used to be. That day, I went to the restaurant early. The staff noticed I was quieter than usual. Even Mr. Carter, my business partner, asked, "Everything okay, Laze? You look lost in thought." "I'm fine," I said, smiling faintly. "Just thinking about the past." He nodded. "The past only hurts when it still matters." His words lingered in my mind, long after he walked away. By noon, the restaurant was full. Families, couples, office workers. Everyone seemed happy, enjoying food I once made in tears. I watched them from behind the counter, realizing that every plate I served carried a piece of my story. Not the pain, but the strength that followed. In the middle of that busy day, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered. "Is this Ms. Laze?" A soft voice said, "I'm calling from Hope Home." My heart froze. "Yes, is everything all right?" The voice hesitated. "I'm sorry to inform you. Daniel passed away this morning." The world around me went silent. The sound of people talking, plates clinking. All of it faded. I could only hear my own breathing. The morning after I saw Daniel at the shelter, I woke up before dawn. For the first time in years, my chest felt heavy. Not with anger, but with something harder to name: emptiness. I stood by the kitchen window, staring at the horizon as the city began to wake. The sky was painted in grey and gold, and the smell of rain still lingered in the air. The world felt quiet, almost too quiet. I made tea, sat down at the table, and stared at my reflection in the cup. My face had changed over the years. Lines that told stories of sleepless nights, small scars that whispered of struggles I'd survived. But in my eyes, there was still that flicker of the woman who once cried for love, for peace, for a home. It was strange how even after all this time, Daniel could still stir something inside me. Not love, not even hate, just a reminder of who I used to be. That day, I went to the restaurant early. The staff noticed I was quieter than usual. Even Mr. Carter, my business partner, asked, "Everything okay, Laze? You look lost in thought." "I'm fine," I said, smiling faintly. "Just thinking about the past," he nodded. "The past only hurts when it still matters." His words lingered in my mind long after he walked away. By noon, the restaurant was full. Families, couples, office workers. Everyone seemed happy, enjoying food I once made in tears. I watched them from behind the counter, realizing that every plate I served carried a piece of my story. Not the pain, but the strength that followed. In the middle of that busy day, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered. "Is this Ms. Laze?" A soft voice said, "I'm calling from Hope Home." My heart froze. "Yes, is everything all right?" The voice hesitated. "I'm sorry to inform you. Daniel passed away this morning." The world around me went silent. The sound of people talking, plates clinking, all of it faded. I could only hear my own breathing. "Did he say anything?" I finally asked. "Yes," the woman said. "He mentioned your name. He said, 'Tell her I'm free now.'" I thanked her, hung up, and stood there for a long time. My hands trembled, my throat tightened, but not a single tear fell. Maybe because, in some way, I'd already said goodbye. That night, I went to the shelter again. The same cracked walls, the same smell of damp air. But this time, there was no Daniel by the window, only an empty chair. A small box sat on the table beside it. The caretaker handed it to me. "He left this for you," she said gently. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter, the old photograph of Noah and me, and a small key. The letter was short, written in Daniel's shaky handwriting. "Laze, if you're reading this, it means my time is over. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know, I never stopped loving you. I was weak, not cruel. I let my mother's voice drown my heart. You were the best part of my life, and I destroyed it with my own hands. This key belongs to a small storage locker at the train station. It holds what little I've managed to save. Money, papers, maybe something that can help Noah. It's not much, but it's yours. You earned it, not me. Tell Noah, I'm sorry I wasn't the father he deserved." Daniel I folded the letter and held it close. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the chair where he used to sit. There was no triumph in his death, no satisfaction in his regret, only quiet acceptance. I whispered to the empty air, "Rest, Daniel. The war between us is over." The next morning, I took the key and went to the train station. The locker was dusty, its metal worn with age. Inside was a small bag, old documents, a few $1,000s in cash, and a letter of ownership for a small house in the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it was more than I expected. I didn't know what to do with it. For hours, I sat in my car, holding the letter and thinking, should I take it? Would accepting it mean forgiving him? When I got home, I showed the papers to Noah. Your father left this for us, I said. A small house, some savings. He frowned. I don't want his charity. It's not charity, I said softly. It's closure. He shook his head. He hurt you, Mom. He abandoned us. Why should we accept anything from him? I looked at him, my son, born from love, raised by struggle. Because anger only gives him more power, I said. But peace takes it away. He didn't reply. He just stared at the floor, his fists clenched. I didn't push him. Some lessons, life teaches slowly. Weeks passed. I decided to visit the house. It was small, surrounded by wildflowers and silence. The air there felt different, cleaner, softer. The house wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. I walked through the rooms, imagining what they might have been if life had gone differently. Maybe, once, Daniel had dreamed of bringing us here. Maybe, in another world, we could have been happy. But that world didn't exist, and that was okay. I stood by the window and whispered, maybe this is your apology, Daniel. Maybe this is your peace offering. I decided to keep the house, not because I forgave him completely, but because it was part of my story, the story of how pain became strength. One afternoon, I took Noah there. He was quiet as we walked through the small garden. It's nice, he admitted. It is, I said. I think we'll keep it, not as a memory of him, but as a reminder of where we came from and how far we've come. He nodded slowly. You really don't hate him, do you? No, I said, smiling faintly, because hate would have made me like him. I chose better. Noah looked at me for a long time, then said, You're the bravest person I know, Mom. I pulled him close. And you're the reason I became her. Months turned into a year. The restaurant thrived more than ever. Laze's table became a name people respected. Sometimes, journalists came to interview me. They asked about my journey, about resilience, about strength. Once a reporter asked, if you could say one thing to the woman you were years ago, the one crying on the floor, scared and broken, what would it be? I smiled. I'd tell her to get up, because one day, her tears will feed her courage. That night, after closing the restaurant, I walked home under the same sky that had once watched me cry. The moon was bright, the air calm. I thought of Daniel, not with sadness, but with peace. I realized that the real revenge was not in seeing him suffer, but in knowing that I no longer needed him to feel complete. I had become everything I once prayed for. Strong, kind, unbreakable. When I got home, Noah was asleep. I looked at him and whispered, This is what love looks like, my son. Not pain, not revenge, just peace. And for the first time in years, I slept without dreams. Because I no longer needed them. I was already living one. Years passed, like soft pages of a book turning in the wind. Time had a way of healing, of softening the edges of pain, though the memories never vanished. They just learned to live quietly in the corners of the heart. Noah had grown into a fine young man. At 25, he was everything I had prayed he'd be. Strong, kind, intelligent, yet grounded in the lessons life had carved into our bones. He worked as a counselor, helping young people find direction, especially those from broken homes. He once told me, Mom, I don't want anyone to feel the way we did when Dad left. And that's when I realized pain, when carried with grace, could turn into purpose. The restaurant, Laze's Table, had now become a small chain. There was one branch in the city, one in the outskirts, and another near the coast. I often found myself smiling when people addressed me as Chef Laze. "Chef," they'd call out. The customers loved your signature dish. Each time I'd smile, remembering the nights when I cooked in tears, scraping coins to buy ingredients. Now those same hands that once trembled with exhaustion stirred pots filled with hope. Success didn't erase the pain of the past, but it gave it meaning. One evening, as I was closing the restaurant, a young woman walked in. She looked nervous, clutching a small notepad. "Ma'am, I'm from the Herald-Times. We're writing an article on women who built their lives from nothing. I've read about you. May I ask a few questions?" I nodded and invited her to sit. She asked about my childhood, my struggles, my work. But then she asked something that made me pause. "What about love, Ms. Laze? Did you ever love again?" I laughed softly, not mockingly, but with the weight of truth. "Love never left," I said. "It just changed its shape. I found it in my son's laughter, in my work, in peace. That's enough." She smiled and wrote something in her notebook. "That's beautiful." Before leaving, she said, "Your story will inspire many. People need to hear what healing really looks like." I thanked her, but in my heart, I knew healing wasn't for the world to see. It was something that grew silently, like a seed breaking through soil, inch by inch, until it touched sunlight. Weeks later, I received an invitation to a women's entrepreneurship conference. They wanted to honor me with an award, Woman of Courage and Resilience. Standing on that stage, under the bright lights, I looked at the audience. Rows of faces, some teary, some smiling, all listening. I spoke from my heart. I was once a woman who thought her life was over. I began. I had nothing, no money, no support, not even faith in myself. But life doesn't end when people leave. It begins when you decide to stay. For yourself, the hall erupted in applause. And for the first time, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt peace. After the ceremony, I sat alone in the car, holding the glass trophy in my lap. On its surface, my reflection shimmered. Older now, wiser, but finally whole. I whispered to myself, "You did it, Laze. You did it without revenge, without hate, without losing your heart." But deep down, I knew the journey was not just mine. It was Noah's too. One Sunday morning, Noah visited me at the coastal branch of the restaurant. He looked happier than usual. "Mom," he said, grinning, "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" I asked, setting down my apron. "I'm getting married." For a moment, I just stared at him. "Married?" He nodded, laughing. "Her name's Clara. She's wonderful, strong, kind, and she knows everything about our past. She said it only makes her love me more." Tears filled my eyes. "Oh, Noah," I whispered, hugging him. "I'm so happy for you." That night, when I was alone, I sat by the window and looked at the stars. I thought about how life had come full circle. The boy who once cried in my arms was now a man ready to build his own family, with love that was honest and free. Months later, the wedding took place by the sea. The same sea I once watched from the rooftop of my first rented house. As Noah and Clara exchanged vows, I stood there, tears streaming down my face, realizing that this was what all those years of pain had been for. Not revenge, not justice, but a future where love could exist without fear. After the ceremony, I walked along the shore, my bare feet sinking into the cool sand. A soft wind brushed my face, and for a moment, I felt something, or maybe someone, beside me. Daniel. No words, no vision, just a feeling, like the past had finally let me go. I closed my eyes and whispered into the wind, "I forgive you." A few years later, life had slowed down. I was 50 now. The restaurant was managed mostly by my staff, and I spent more time painting, gardening, and writing short stories. Sometimes I'd visit the small house Daniel had left behind. It was my sanctuary now. a place for reflection. I'd bring Noah's children there, 2 bright-eyed twins who called me Grandma Laze. They'd run through the garden, laughing, their joy echoing through the quiet house. Once, little Lily asked me, "Grandma, where's Grandpa Daniel?" I paused, smiling softly. "He's resting," I said. "Far away where the stars live," she nodded thoughtfully. "Did he love you?" I hesitated, then answered. In his own broken way, yes. But sometimes, love alone isn't enough. You need courage too. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the porch, watching the moon rise above the sea. My hands, once rough from work, now rested calmly in my lap. I thought of everything. The pain, the loneliness, the nights of crying into pillows, the fear of starting over, the courage that came from nowhere. And I realized life had given me exactly what I needed, not what I wanted. It broke me, yes, but only so I could rebuild myself stronger. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the shelter where Daniel had spent his last days. Inside was a note from one of the caretakers. "Dear Ms. Laze, we recently found an old journal among Daniel's belongings. We thought you might want to have it." I opened it. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting shaky. It was Daniel's journal. Page after page, he had written about his regrets, his memories of me and Noah, his slow understanding of what he'd lost. In one entry, he wrote, "She deserved the world, but I gave her pain. If there's an afterlife, I'll find her and thank her for raising our son to be better than I ever was." I closed the book, holding it to my chest. There were no tears, only silence. Sometimes forgiveness isn't spoken out loud. It's felt quietly, like a wound that no longer aches when touched. One final thing I did. I placed the journal on a shelf at the small coastal house, beside my photo with Noah from his wedding day. I left it there, not as a memory of the past, but as a testament to survival, to growth, to the kind of love that transforms pain into strength. The house had once symbolized betrayal. Now it represented peace. Years later, as I grew older, I often sat by the sea with my grandchildren. They'd ask me to tell them stories. Not fairy tales, but real ones. And I'd smile and begin. There was once a woman named Laze who thought her world had ended, but she didn't know. It was only beginning. They'd listen, wide-eyed, asking, "What happened next, Grandma?" And I'd say, "She built a new world from her tears." And she taught everyone who came after her that strength doesn't mean never falling. It means rising, again and again. One evening, long after the children had gone to bed, I sat on the porch again. The sea shimmered under the moonlight. I thought of Daniel, of his mother, of the years that had once felt unbearable. I smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you, life, for every storm, because without them, I'd never have learned how to dance in the rain." The wind carried my words out to the ocean. A whisper of closure, a sigh of gratitude, and in that moment, as the stars blinked over the water, I felt completely free.